Thinking about it.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, wait. There we go. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. And we are very delighted to have with us today Alan Gordon slash Allison Montclair talking about his brand new book, Murder, Murder at the White Palace. Sorry for the glare there. And Alan signed a bunch of copies for us, so I will go ahead and put a link in the comments field if you'd like to order one. And then go ahead and type your questions in too. And Barbara will bring me on screen towards the end of the hour to ask any of your questions. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Well, first thing we should do, Alan, is raise a glass because today is publication day.
I should have wine. I'm
Congratulations.
sorry, I got water.
That's okay. It's it's the act that counts. So I would like to say that this is one of my very favorite series, but previously, writing as Alan Gordon, he wrote one of my other very favorite series about Fest the Fool.
Yeah.
Oh, how long ago was that, Alan?
The last book was 2010, and I do miss them.
I miss them too. They were wonderful, medieval. You can tell there's a little Shakespearean thing there, but
Yeah.
there was a spell of about 20 years when historical mystery was really huge. Um, Possibly because historical fiction had sort of, in the way that all genre, fiction goes up and down and up and down in popularity. Currently, horror, the gothic, and dark fantasy, and even cozy fantasy or cottagecore, a new
Hmm.
word I learned, is way on the rise. And thrillers and traditional mystery are kind of a little bit on a downslope. But I think that historical mystery will come back. And that's not to confuse it with the absolute cornucopia of World War II stories.
Mhm.
Huge number of World War II stories. And I would say a majority, I might be wrong here, but it seems to me a majority of them are by women about women.
Mhm.
Whereas after the war, if you go back to Alistair MacLean and people like that, the Guns have narrowed, yay.
Read a
Um,
lot. Yes.
Love that book. Absolutely. Well, I loved all his books, but that one in particular, Ice Station Zebra, he was great. But those were more books about actual wartime battles and so forth. And the books publishing today, most of them are really about women playing roles, not on the front lines, but doing stuff, running victory gardens, keeping bookstores open,
Mhm.
activists, drop behind, enemy lines in France to join the resistance, daring escapes, undercover stories, whatever. So this one takes you past the war. We are in point of fact, where are we in 1946?
Right at the end of 46 for this one. It's been about a book a month for the series so far. This one actually takes us literally to New Year's Eve.
That's right. Okay. I
It,
just want to be sure it was 46 and not 47.
it
Anyway,
is, yeah. Yeah.
yep, post-war. And, Britain did not make what I would call a swift recovery in almost any way. I mean, so much of it, certainly in London, was bombed, destroyed. People were homeless. Children had been evacuated. Many of them
Mhm.
got lost in the shuffle. Some of them met worse fates. Rhys Bowen's forthcoming book, The Rose Garden, is actually about children who were like got a little card and were sent off to find a train and join a
Mhm.
group. And wow. Um, and then the economy was not in great shape, and food was scarce. Dental care, as far as I can work out, was nearly non-existent. If you know people my age, who survived World War II, British people, they very often have terrible teeth. Have you ever
Mhm.
noticed that? Lack of calcium in the, milk and all the rest, but terrible dentists. Lack of dentistry, rather. So anyway, we have two women here who decided to follow an interesting economic model. So tell us about the right sort. And then I want to talk about the Lunacy Bureau, because this is something you've incorporated in this series I knew absolutely nothing about.
Yeah, well, my characters are two women who run into each other at a wedding, and they each had something to do with getting the couple together. And meet together for lunch, and this is all before the series starts. We hear about this in flashback and decide that they're going to form a licensed marriage bureau, and there were such things at the time. And
This is the real version of Tinder, in other words. But
yeah, this is pre-Tinder. This is they had a economic plan for £5. You get to be introduced to people, and if you actually end up marrying somebody they set up with you, then both sides pay an additional £20, basically success.
Just to make it a little clearer, how did they actually recruit clients? Did clients of both sexes arrive at the right sort? And that's
yes, they had not quite an equal number when they start out, but they start out by recruiting single friends and saying, "Come join us, we'll fix you up." And they both, like I said, had a knack for it, and they both come at it from sort of different approaches. Gwen is out of the aristocracy and is a young war widow with a 6-year-old son, and she has a knack for reading people. Nothing, extra sensory, but she just is good at reading faces. She would be what we would have called a cold reader in the Carney circuit. And then Iris has a background in intelligence. She's out of Cambridge University before the war, and that was at a time when Cambridge was still not giving women degrees. They were possibly the last university in England to actually give women degrees. So they would give them the education, something called a Bachelor of Arts title, but not an actual degree. But then, she was brilliant, ends up in intelligence, and then certain wartime disasters, which we hear bits and pieces of over the course of the books, ended up driving her out of the intelligence service. So she's basically looking for something to do at this point. And they started up a marriage bureau, and it was very difficult for women to start up any kind of business because they couldn't get credit. They, had to end up going to several banks. Gwen, although she's rich, does not have access to her money because when her husband was killed, she ended up basically going into a spiral and tried to kill herself and ended up being committed to a sanitarium during the war. And when that happened in England, you become a ward of the crown. And you were mentioning the people who are wards of the crown because of mental illness back then fell under the auspices of a specialized court called the Court of Lunacy. It was actually called the Lunacy Court. It was actually called that until 1947. So it was an offshoot of Chancery. And they had, as you can imagine, very odd procedural rules and a particular disregard of the rights of the people they were supposedly looking after, and particularly if they were women. So Gwen is...
Sorry, I was going to stick in a note here based upon, years ago when I actually studied law. British law evolved over time, and the Chancery law was applied. It was basically run by the church, if I remember correctly. And it dealt with like domestic matters, lunacy, things like that, whereas civil law dealt with actual, criminal claims, cases, prosecutions, whatever. And that's why it's still called the Chancery Court, although the church no longer actually runs that branch of the law. But I've always thought that was an interesting decision. If you go back and read Brother Cadfael, for example, and you remember that the monastery is Benedictine monastery in Shrewsbury was basically the hospital. It was basically, the welcoming inn. It was refugees. It was, childcare. It was all kinds of things. Those monks led really busy lives, the ones that weren't actually cloistered. Or is that the right word for monks? Nuns are cloistered.
The nuns are cloistered. I'm not sure what monks would be. I don't know. It's not my religion, so I'm not really up.
No, well, anyway, just being picky here. But and so I think it's interesting that there's a new book out by a woman called Sally Smith called Of Mice or Murder that reminds me of you in many ways, although more like Sarah Cowdwell. And she sets her whole mystery in the temple, because that's the two temples. It's called the temple because originally it was a church built by the Knights Templar. I didn't realize to this day are independent of the City of London. The police can't come in and investigate. You have to, and I like the fact that Britain has held on, to these ancient traditions, probably because they worked in part.
Or they just had too much clout for them to be changed by Parliament. So
That too, right?
yeah,
Anyway, a digression, but I love the way Alan explores this whole idea of the lunacy court and how desperate Gwen is as she makes the recovery.
Yeah.
Her in-laws, very wealthy, somewhat hostile because they didn't approve of their son marrying her, have custody of her son. He's the heir to the family. And Gwen is desperate to get out of the lunacy court's purview and reclaim her son and reclaim her own money.
Yes. Well, that's finally happened with the last book. Well, actually, that was the book prior to that is the resolution to sort of that overall storyline. So when this book starts, it's about 3 weeks after she's finally freed of the court of lunacy. And she's had the idea that with the New Year's coming up, that the right sort should throw a New Year's ball for all of their unattached clients as, first of all, a thing to, bring them all together in one room and possibly stir up some business that way. And also just as a celebration of surviving their first year. But then, of course, things go horribly wrong because that's what happens.
Patrick has sent me a note saying monks can also be cloistered, but they're often called enclosed.
Okay.
He has a phone, which I don't really want to pick up and look at while we're talking. So it's helpful that he gives us these hints. So a question relating to that before we move forward is, where does the financing come from for the right sort if Gwen doesn't have free access to her money?
Well,
never really had lots.
They finally get some starter money from, after going to, I think it was 17 different banks. They finally convinced one of them to give them a loan.
Okay.
And then it's been basically, they're operating very much on a minimum level with the fees that they collect from their clients. So there's an opening fee, and that barely gives them enough to keep the place going. But when the series starts, they're working out of a one-room office with used furniture that's in very rickety condition. I really feel like the desks become characters in their own right in some ways. And then they end up in the second book helping out a member of the royal family who then gives them basically a loan, as she calls it. But, it's not a royal charter, as she says, but gives them enough money to help keep going. That allows them to open up a second office and hire a secretary, so expand. And as the business begins to take off, they're getting more and more clients. The clientele expands. More and more people are getting married. It does become a viable business for them, except for the fact that they keep stumbling into these odd cases that they have to solve.
Very true. I loved A Royal Affair. You brought up something, no spoilers here, but if you haven't read it, it's just a really brilliant mystery, but it's also an interesting look at the British royal family, not in a negative way. But when you have so many royals and so many relationships and so much heredity going on and so forth, it's I think much of it is kept secret. We're even seeing that today, that nobody knows for sure what kind of cancer Princess Kate has, for example. It's her own business and nobody has the right to know.
I hope she does well. I have no idea what goes on there. It's not my family, so.
No, I know, but the thing is that people have always, I think, for centuries, because of the central role, less so today in terms of power, but certainly in terms of scrutiny and interest, have always felt a sense of ownership in the royal family, even though the royal family has clearly had a sense of ownership of everything around them. And so their curiosity, I think, is a big deal. Anyway, you take us to a part of London in this book that is not salubrious.
Yeah, well, they end up going to basically an East End nightclub. Iris, during the course of the books, has had an ongoing relationship with a gangster. In fact, the head of a gang named Archie Spelling. And the term for gangsters in that period of time in London were spivs, S-P-I-V. And he is running gangs, basically on the docks of the Thames, but also he's acquired a couple of nightclubs. So the idea that Gwen has had that they need to find a place to have a dance, they don't, it's late in the game to reserve anything. And they end up going to Archie, who in fact has acquired a nightclub that's still being fixed up from damage from the Blitz. So that's the nightclub, the White Palace. That's the title place. It's not an actual royalty infested area. It's a club on the East End, and it has its own history. As I think somebody says, you can't find a decent club without 6 bodies being around its history somewhere. And in the course of the first chapter, as they're inspecting the club to see if it's going to be ready in time for the dance, a body literally falls out of the bricks as they're being torn down to be rebuilt. And that's what triggers the whole plot of the mystery.
Absolutely. I mean, so much of the East End was destroyed in the war. There's only bits and pieces of it left. And if I remember right, Soho in the 20s, all those bright young things, wasn't that full of nightclubs and, mixed race entertainers and, gives and the whole bit?
Yeah, and I forget, there's one club that there was one club that took a direct hit, one of the famous clubs, and I'm trying to remember the name of it now. Not the Trocadero, but I just remember running across, it was like I mean, you can read about, that you can see about the bomb damage all over everywhere in London. But yeah, Soho and the clubs definitely took their hits. I kept thinking of the series, not a mystery, but I read Anthony Powell's a Dance to the Music of Time, which is a nine book historical novel, basically. But a lot of it took place during World War II and the Blitz, and they talk about the bright young things and the clubs that were hit.
Right. Well, there are many different classes in London. Years ago, when Rob and I started Poison Pen Press, one of the first books we published is one of my favorite mystery titles ever. And it was about a young woman in old London. And the title of the book was Not All Tarts Are Apple.
Yes.
Fabulous title and a wonderful look at a kind of colorful, Cockney Soho. Well, they're not the same thing, but anyway, a wonderful look at, life and survival strategies, for people who didn't actually have money or connections. But so it's an interesting pairing where we have Gwen, who, as you point out, has married up for sure, but also where's her money come from? Was it a settlement when she got married, or did she come from money?
Well, she came from money, which is how she was able to be in that world. And she was brought up in the aristocracy, but she wasn't allowed to go to university because she was a woman. So she basically ends up, she finishes finishing school in Switzerland and comes back and is groomed to be on the market, and presented to the court, and then has her basically as out and about, giving her balls and all that, the way they did it, prior to the war, and ends up marrying into the Bainbridge family, but it actually makes a love match out of it. It's an extremely rich family. So when her husband's killed, she actually inherits his share of the family business, which is worth a lot.
It is worth
a lot from that.
And I'm glad you remind us that not all impoverished, well, in this case, they're not impoverished, but not all aristocratic families married rich Americans. Sometimes they, found other British or European wives, but infusions of money were always welcome.
Yeah, her in-laws' family were heavily invested in munitions and copper mines in Africa, so they did very well by the war.
They did, but you could sort of tell that if copper mines in Africa were part of their wealth, that maybe things aren't going to go as swimmingly for them.
Yeah, we haven't got there yet, though. We're still in 1946.
No, we have not. But anyway, however it works out. So so there they are. They've got their nightclub for New Year's Eve. They want to have a right sort celebration New Year's party for their clients, and a skeleton. It is a skeleton, right?
It's a corpse. It's somewhat desiccated. I don't know if we will go with just skeleton. I'm not going to get gruesome on the details of it.
No. Anyway, it's been there for a while. It's clearly not a brand new body.
Right.
Falls out of the brickwork. And then the question is, who knew how to get there? Who knew about it then? Who knows about it now? And off we go, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what else would you like to say?
Well, one of the other things that happens is that, so in the fifth book and the last book, I sort of resolved the Gwen overall storyline involving the Court of Lunacy. This one is devoted to the relationship of Iris and Archie,
Right.
Which has been developing over time. And among other things, she brings him to meet her mother for the first time. And her mother's somebody she has an uneasy relationship with. Her mother is a liberal MP. And Iris probably goes further than liberal into socialism in her political viewpoints, but she has always had a difficult relationship with her mother, and her parents were divorced when she was in her early teens. So that's been something that affected her as well. And then she's bringing home an East End gangster to meet this woman, who is, not an aristocrat. She's, very much middle class. She was a school teacher and a suffragist and a crusader for birth control and things like that, which is how she ended up getting into Parliament. And that was a very fun encounter to write. And then we have the flip side of it, where she ends up going to a wedding, one which had been set up by the right sort, but it's also Archie's nephew. So we get to meet Archie's family, and she gets to meet all of them as well. And it's a much different experience, so she gets to meet his sister and all of his unmarried nieces, and just the general tumult of meeting a family that's very different than her own. And they basically take her under their wing during the course of the book.
They do. And, realistically, neither Iris nor Archie was ever going to want a conventional spouse.
No, they were not conventional people.
Iris, for sure, if she wanted to have a spouse at all. She's had actually a pretty brisk extracurricular life of her own.
Yes, she has.
Gwen's a widow, but Iris, it's not like she's either of them is a shy virgin, and that probably makes them better as proprietors of something like the right sort. What I thought when I read your first book, I was forcibly reminded of the first time we met Harriet Vane in the Lord Peter Wimsey, the four books about Harriet, because she worked in a sort of, I'm trying to remember what you'd call it. She was a typist in a clerical office, I guess. There was a woman running it, a type bureau. I couldn't think of the word. She was a typist in a kind of office bureau run by a woman. And that was in the 1930s, because those books are pre-war.
Yeah, 20s, I think.
Yeah. And there weren't many jobs really open for women, other than domestic. Although World War I had kind of quieted the interest that people had in working as servants in main establishments and so forth. And so many men were killed, and so many big houses were, not necessarily going to survive also as the economy begins to go. So women are really looking for work, for independence, for their own money, and some kind of profession.
Yeah, well, they had gotten the vote finally at the end of, I think, in 1916, I think it was, in England. And then Harriet Vane was interesting because she had gone to Oxford too, which is what came up in Gaudy Night.
Exactly. Yeah. And Oxford, I think, started giving out degrees around 1920. It seems to me that Dorothy Sayers went to Somerville College, if I recall.
I forget which college it was. I know she went to one of them.
It was Somerville. And that was the college that did admit women, or maybe it was a women's college. I can't really remember. But I don't know that their degrees were official at the beginning. I think, Oxford got there before Cambridge, but it's not clear to me that Dorothy Sayers, I could look it up. Patrick, if you're listening, see if Dorothy Sayers actually got a BA or a MA or whatever from Oxford, or whether it was...
I think she probably was there before they started giving them degrees, because I think she got out of college during the teens. By then, they were. I don't think they were doing it then. I think they were. There was actually, because I've been researching this with Cambridge, but Cambridge and Oxford were both sort of forced to do better by women by a law that was passed giving some equality to the sexes by Parliament, and they resisted, but other schools just sort of adopted it right away. Oxford and Cambridge were the holdouts.
I didn't know whether Oxford might have given her a master's degree later
Maybe
on.
later. Yeah.
Whether an honorary degree or whatever. Universities have ways of rewarding people with degrees that they didn't actually earn at the university, but rather in some other,
Yeah.
aspect of life. Anyway, Jackie Winsper's written an interesting series, as you know, about Maisie Dubbs, a young woman who started out as a young girl in service in a big house down in Kent, I think it is. And then by a whole series of events moves along. But she drove an ambulance, I think it was, in the First World War. And then she sets up a private inquiry business of her own with a male partner, or at least a male employee, is not a partner. And it's just ended. That series has just ended with the conclusion of World War II. So in her series, like in yours, we're seeing women partly as a function of both wars, gaining employment, gaining careers, learning skills, and sort of trying to break the glass ceiling.
Yeah. I mean, Maggie Thatcher was graduating from Oxford around the end of World War II.
Right.
And had not gotten heavily involved with politics yet. I think she was a chemist. But
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think that's what sticks in my head. But then she got into obviously politics and worked her way up through the ranks.
So you brought really these sort of character arcs and their individual stories to an end. Are you planning to write something different? I mean, this is
no, I'm actually, the series is continuing. I'm actually, oh yeah. Book 7's already written. It's going to be out from Severin Press next year, and Severin has signed me actually pretty recently to books 8 and 9. So I'm working on book 8 right now.
I might have mentioned you to Severin.
Oh, I appreciate it.
You're welcome. They're actually, I think, a very good fit for you.
Yeah, no, I actually had my editor's name was Victoria, which I actually got a kick out of because I have finally I have an actual British editor named Victoria, which helps me a great deal.
I think it's wonderful, and it does give you access to a wider British audience, but also more of a continental audience.
Hope so.
And the other good news is that Severin has new management. I met with them in London, and they are going to be doing many paperbacks, which for a long time was not part of their business plan. They were primarily publishing hardcover books for libraries. And now that they're going to be doing paperbacks, 2 of my Poison Pen Press authors are publishing with Severin now.
Okay.
And they're very pleased, and I have seen that they will both have paperbacks of their first hardcovers with Severin. So that means that, you will have paperbacks, which will be wonderful.
Yeah. Well, right now, with these books, I'll be, I think, good through 1947. So.
Excellent. And lots of interesting stuff happened. Do you remember Robert Harris's book that he wrote about, Bletchley Park? I can't remember, Enigma, that's what it's called.
Okay. I know of it. I haven't read it.
If you have not read it, you might want to read what is, not to copy him or anything, but what he has to say about immediate post-war British life. And I remember one of the things he talks about was that during the war, and even after the war, there wasn't enough soap. And so, people were not clean. They weren't clean physically, and their clothes often were not clean. And, that was one of the trials of the war, is that you had to get used to how people smelled. And
the water was rationed too. So I think they were limited to 2 inches of water in the bathtub.
You're right. And, in many rural areas where they didn't have indoor bathrooms, they had, still had what they called privies and so forth.
Sure.
They would fill up a tub on Saturday night, and, one by one, the members of the family would use the same tub and the same water, which I've always thought was really gross. But
and the youngest kid never got clean, right?
So if you happen to send them out into the country and, on a case, which would not be unreasonable, there are many things you could write about, because it's easy to assume that as soon as the war was over, life went back to normal. But
no, it took a long time. Not a long time. I think rationing kept going till the mid-50s in England.
It did. Absolutely. And that's what happens in part when you extend your supply lines so far as an island nation, that when
Yeah.
we saw that during COVID in this country,
Mhm.
that when you are sourcing like paper, for example, it's really played hell with publishing because paper was largely imported and all of a sudden couldn't access it,
Yeah, I
container.
was amazed to find out that we were getting paper from overseas for publishing, for making books.
Right. Yeah, well, yeah, we outsourced a lot of basic industries, and
Mhm.
I had really hoped that one of the there was any kind of benefit or realignment of COVID would be that we would bring much of it back in the United States so we wouldn't get caught in a vulnerable situation again. I mean,
Mm.
that's the trouble with the global economy is when it's interrupted.
Sure.
There we are. Well, that's exciting. I'm really happy to know that, or have you confirmed that these two characters will carry on, because I think this is just a marvelous series. Have you thought about going back and writing another book about Fest?
Nobody's asked me to, so and it would be interesting to. I would have to. I've got an entire bookcase of medieval history books, which my wife keeps saying, "Do you really need those?" I said, "You never know." So it would be interesting to go back. I would have to reread them all and reread all my notebooks of notes and just see if I can get the voices back into my head of those characters, which I think I could do. And there were stories I wanted to tell beyond where
Right.
that series ended. Certainly, there are plenty of characters waiting for them to show up. So never say never. But someone's got to make me an offer. Yeah, I'm not going to write. I'm not going to put that amount of work on spec.
No, I understand that, but
Yeah,
if I remember right, haven't you recently retired from your day job?
I
So,
have at May 1st. I am now no longer a lawyer.
right.
Or
And therefore,
technically, I'm a lawyer. Technically, my license is good until next March, till my 66th birthday. But I worked for the Legal Aid Society as a public defender for 39 plus years, and hit the age where the government says I'm officially old enough to do this. And enough things clicked for me to say, okay, I think I've done with being a lawyer, and I miss the people. I miss all my friends there. But I don't miss the work, I find, although I'm still adjusting to having the new routine, as is my wife.
oh, that's why I mentioned that you might have the time now that
Yeah,
you're
I have more time to write, but this is not my only project at the moment. So
really. What else are you doing?
well, I have this odd, the third sideline in musical theater. Um, and I've been working on a project for way too many years. It was one of these things like, this sounds like a fun idea. I've written several musicals which have gotten, staged readings. One got produced in a theater out in Michigan, which was wonderful. And then I had this idea, which I've been sitting on for years, of writing 6 short musicals about murder. I had 6 plot lines. So basically short story musicals, but I want to write them each with a different composer. That was going to be the challenge. So right now I'm basically 4 down. I'm working on the 5th. I was working on a lyric this morning. I actually had written I actually had 5, but one of them was based on a Roald Dahl short story, and we ended up not getting the rights
Ah,
because the estate sold everything to Disney. So
well, they did.
yeah, so I'm staying with original stories, but I've got 6 sort of dark, twisted musical ideas, and I was hoping to have this done a few years ago, but then the pandemic hit. I literally met with one of the composers in February of 2020 and said, okay, let's work together. And then boom. So it was all online after that.
Well, you don't have to, bring Fest back from the dead. You could, in fact, write some other totally different series if you wanted to. I
I'll see what happens. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just very fond of your writing. I love
Hmm.
your rather sly wit, and I think you're a great plotter.
Thank you.
And I know you really like historical research. You like to immerse yourself in various periods. So,
Yeah, I'm not a trained historian, but I like learning, and just some little detail will trigger me to, dive into some odd aspect of, in this case, English society. The most recent book, I fell in love with the game of snooker, which I've never played, but I've watched a lot of it because it's a particularly British version of pool or billiards, although it's international as well. Because I wanted to have that sort of, the pool hall settings for the characters to go to. And it turns out that Gwen has also a knack for snooker.
Yeah, I mean, she's a surprising one. You would think that it would be Iris who could play snooker, but it turns out to be
Right. Well, that's where I made it. Yeah, I
Gwen.
wanted to make it Gwen. Yeah. But she was always, she lived in a mansion where they had a snooker table. So she played it when she was growing up.
Yeah, it makes sense. Most British stately homes had some sort of a, I think they called it billiards rooms,
Sure.
if I recall, but snooker is played on a billiards table. So
It's a huge table compared to a regular billiards table. Yeah.
oh, I didn't realize that a snooker table is much smaller.
Yeah, I think it's 15 feet. I don't know. It's bigger than what we consider a standard pool table.
Does it have a felt covering like a pool table?
Yeah. No, it's felt covering and 6 holes, but the rules are much more complex than pool. There's a lot of strategy to it. And I've become very addicted to watching it online. And someday I'm going to find there's got to be a pool hall in New York somewhere that has a snooker table.
I bet it does. Gosh, it
Yeah.
could be a new Olympic sport. They keep adding. They keep adding.
I think
You
so.
and I were watching the skateboarding, and I haven't yet seen the breakdancing.
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely great that they are incorporating. As I remember, I read, I think it was, I don't remember which newspaper it was in, that back when the first Olympic Games was, it was just several naked men running a distance, and that was it.
And now you have to pay good money to see that.
Yep, you do. Now you'd have some trouble watching it because they wouldn't televise it. But it was so simple for a long time. It was just basically, track, running. And then after a while, they added a few things. And, there we are again from that modern version of the Olympics. Which
we were driving up, my wife and I were driving up from the shore last week, and the radio was on talking about the Olympics and all the new sports, and they were taking calls from listeners saying, what sports do they not have yet that they think they should? And a lot of people want to see roller derby, which I agree with.
That would be, well, if they can do all these other field sports like hockey and lacrosse, the rest of roller derby is just a variation on that. So
sure.
Why not? I'm looking forward, I hope that they're going to televise some of the surfing, because Robert and I were in Tahiti. I think it was April of 2023. Yeah, it must have been.
I've seen it listed on some of, not the main channel, but if you go to where it's on some of the other cable channels.
One of the things they took us to see was where they were building the little surfing Olympic. I have a great picture of it on my phone where it's just kind of undeveloped in a banner. This is 2024 Olympics. They hadn't even started, construction. So I think it'd be fabulous to see it. And my dentist, with whom I've spent much of today, has actually surfed those waves. And
oh, wow.
They're truly terrifying. So I thought it was a gutsy call on the part of the organizers to send the surfing to Tahiti when they probably could have done it somewhere off the coast of Brittany.
Yeah.
Kept it in France, but I love that. Anyway, let me say that this is a series, I think, even though the mystery is complete unto itself, to really understand the characters, you really have to start, I think, at the beginning and read your way through. The Right Sort of Man, A Royal Affair, A Rogue's Company, The Unkept Woman, The Lady from Burma, and now Murder at the White Palace. The great, with series, you do get a complete story every time, but many series have character arcs that if you don't start them at the beginning, they're spoilers if you then go back and read an earlier one.
Yeah. But the thing is, for me, the interest is in the characters, the lead characters, and I want to know what's going to happen to them next,
Right.
Just as the writer, when I was setting up this series, I really thought further ahead than I did with my first series because I'd never written a series before. So,
Right.
Now I know how to do this a little better.
Yeah, well, one of my key examples of that is Elizabeth Peters' first book, A Crocodile on the Sandbank, because, if you don't read it first, you will never be able to read any suspense into a crocodile on the sandbank, in terms of the bad actors. So, we used to take later books away from people,
Mhm.
hand them Crocodile in case they had picked it up by mistake. I'm pleased to
Yeah.
see that it's still in print.
I always have the problem of how often do I describe what they look like, because I always assume that somebody's coming to them from having read a previous book. And if I do, is it going to be, just to keep saying, oh, she's tall and blonde and the other one's short and brunette, every time, is that finding variations on that, or do I just
Sure.
leave it, So
Well,
just,
I mean, that is a problem with series always, is how much material do you introduce for the new reader?
right.
And various people have had various strategies. Kinsey Milhone had a little black dress for her almost entire career.
Mhm.
So I think a light hand is the best way to do it. Because otherwise you tend to bore people who
Yeah.
who are already into it. So it's a tricky question. Patrick, come and join us and tell us if you have any questions from the audience or any comments.
Hello, Patrick.
Hi. Let's see here. What do we have? Well, I wanted to ask you about, the post-war, how long it took for them to clean up all the rubble. And weren't there big mounds of rubble well into the 60s and even in the 70s in London?
I think there was still, I think definitely in the 60s, you could still see evidence of it going on, because that's only 20 years after the
Yeah,
fact.
right.
So it's all a question of, who had the finances to rebuild there. It's one thing to clear out rubble, it's another to put a new building up. There was a great deal of government investing in housing, specifically, that was going up. And they actually took the opportunity post-war to do some innovation in expanding the city of London and thinking about how to put neighbors so that, the neighborhoods, so there could be these new sort of sections of town growing up where people could live that would still allow for commuting to the center of the city. So there was some city planning going on that took advantage of the bombing, essentially. But that also, caused the usual local differences, whether it was people there. I have a reference to it in this book where Archie, when he meets the MP, is complaining about them, wanting to build in a park that he grew up in, as a kid. So he's trying to basically persuade the Iris's mother, the MP, to not have that done, put it somewhere else. That was actually based on a true thing that happened in that period, and I was able to sort of spin off of.
Well, sometimes it's a catastrophe that levels parts of a city and allows rebuilding. Really, the Great Fire of London. Well, originally, probably it was the Black Plague in 1349 that reconfigured things. And then the Great Fire of London got rid of a lot of the medieval and terrible housing that, nobody had cleared in order to build something different. Paris is Paris today because Napoleon III, asked Baron Haussmann to clear out much of medieval Paris and put up the buildings we think of Paris. But up until the, I don't remember, 1850s or something, 1860, Paris was largely a medieval city. And it took so which is worse, to have your own government clear you out and, start to rebuild, or, have part of the city burned down or have part of the city bombed out.
Yeah, and it was also interesting because right after the wars, when the Attlee's government came into power, so they got rid of the conservatives for a while. So you had the Labor government in power for the first time since over 20 years.
A more radical government looking.
More radical government, a lot of socialist background for a lot of them.
The 2012 Olympics in London, that whole thing was constructed on the East End, or part of it that had been largely destroyed during the war and maybe never had really come back. And there was a lot of controversy about building it out there.
Yeah, well, they always build things in places where people who have less political power, to protest against it. So that's always been true anywhere. It's true of what Robert Moses did in New York City, so.
Oh yeah. I mean, and look at Seattle that just tore down, the expressway that had blocked off their waterfront. or Boston that, put in a tunnel to get around
Yeah.
all those things to get to the airport. Moses, yeah, really, really trashed a lot of neighborhoods in New York.
Yep.
Anyway, Patrick, that was a long answer to your question.
What was the name? The Lunacy House?
Court.
Court.
Well, that was the Court of Lunacy, or Lunacy Court.
Yeah.
And it's now in 1947. It was called. It was changed to the Court of Personal Protection, I think.
Doesn't have the same ring to it, does it?
No, but it's nicer. At one point, they were proposing calling it was actually called, I think, the I'm trying to remember what the acronym was. It was like the Ministry of Adjustment Disorders, but that came out as MAD. So that didn't last.
Did you ever read at the same period Graham Greene's great book, Ministry of Fear?
I haven't read that one. I've read a lot of Graham Greene, but I still haven't read that one.
You'd probably like it because it really deals with the Blitz itself and
I'm
the
sure I would.
aftermath of great book.
I still remember I took a modern English novel course back in the 70s in college, because I'm of that age. And the professor, it was a wonderful course, started with, in the 1800s, but we got to Graham Greene and the professor for each of the authors would give a little bit of a biographical background. This was one author a week. And he says, when we got up to Greene, I think we were reading The Power and the Glory. He says, Mr. Greene is perhaps the most significant author because he's the only one of these authors that I've actually met. He says, I was stationed in London during the war, and he was at a party, and I was at a party, and I went up to him and I said, hello, Mr. Greene. And he said, hello. And that was pretty much it. It was that was the whole story about Graham Greene. But it was it was very self-deprecating. I was an American student in the war thing, or American soldier in the war story.
Wow. Yeah. He seemed like he was kind of an unpleasant person.
He was a neurotic. I always associate him
complicated.
With the fact that he would write exactly 400 words a day, no more, not one word more or less. And if he was in the middle of a sentence, he would stop.
Hey, you have to kind of admire that. That's how he got
yeah.
Yeah.
I try and write at least 400 words a day, and I think the 400 I got from him,
Do 402 or 403 just to beat Graham Greene.
I just as a minimum.
Yeah, I like his what he called his entertainments more than his heavy duty, Catholic novels like Power and the Glory and whatnot.
But there's also Our Man in Havana and things like
Our
that.
Man in Havana, right. Yeah, we just did Brighton Rock for our discussion group. I realize we're getting way off topic here and talking about Graham Greene.
We have plenty of time. Why not?
We did Brighton Rock, and what a fascinating, I'd never read the book before, and very interesting book. Yeah, very influential. Let's see, anybody else have no real questions that I'm seeing? Congratulations for the new two book deal.
Thank you.
That's cool. Of your contemporaries, your peers writing in this genre, do you have any favorites?
I tend not to read people writing in the same area because I don't want to be accidentally influenced or anything like that by them. Which is, it's not that and it's also I'm my pleasure reading time. I'm hoping to do more of it now. When I still had the full-time job as a lawyer, and then I was trying to write books and musicals on the side, I didn't have a lot of huge reading time. And that's something I hope to get more of now. We have a huge stack of books that I'm getting around to, like everybody does. The Times had that, the 100 best books of the 21st century, and everybody's, trying to do the check off. And I was really feeling depressed until I got to the last 20 where I was doing better. I don't feel like I'm a super well-read person. Plus I'm in the same conversation with Barbara Peters, who reads everything, which is a gift. It's a wonderful thing.
It's also a function of age.
I'm aging. I'm aging. I'm still functioning, but I'm also aging. So
Right.
So to get back of my peers, the book I read, Mariah Frederick's book, The Lindbergh Nanny, is, I think, the best historical mystery ever, or is historical more like crime fiction, I guess. Since this is not a mystery.
A
as
very
much.
good book. We did a Zoom event for it, and I thought she did a brilliant job researching it, you know.
Yeah, and she lives in. We've actually gotten to be friendly because she
Oh,
lives in
good.
Queens. Yeah, so I met her for the first time at
Wonderful.
Malice a couple of conferences ago, and
Yeah.
we've been friends since.
Well, as I said, fiction rolls up and down and what publishers want to publish, and they dive into something and then they overpublish it. A lot of bad, bad work then ensues as everybody rushes to grab the brass ring, and then stuff comes back again. And I think, solid historical mystery has always had a good fan base. And I think it will swing back up again. Don't you,
Hope so.
Patrick? I mean, we've watched cycles,
Yeah.
30
It's
years, we've seen this happen.
I think there is maybe going to be a medieval resurgence at some point. It's kind of astonishing to me that all the Brother Cadfael books are not readily available in paperback anymore.
I agree. I
I
mean, they are
mean, in
completely
the mid
timeless.
90s, that was, she was all the rage.
Yep.
And yeah,
And, the other thing is that they don't age. Medieval mystery is just the same today as it was when she wrote it in the 90s. And an awful lot of contemporary fiction ages pretty quickly. It gets dated, but it does not. So
remember World War I stuff was kind of a non-starter back then. I mean, World War I, there was hardly anything written about that war, at least in the mystery genre,
I'm
right?
thinking Charles Todd. I guess he's post
Yeah,
World War
they're the
I. I mean,
ones
and
who
there's
really-
people returning from the war. I mean,
but
like
it
if
wasn't, when we started the store, historical World War I was just barely history. The 1920s were just barely history. And now, I'm reading books set in the 1960s and early 70s that we're calling historical mysteries. So
yeah, well, that's because when we were kids, there were still World War I veterans alive. And
yeah, no. So I mean, your 1947 is a solid historical. I mean, 46 is the solid historical.
Yeah, the last World War II veterans are like 100 years old now, and so it's
Isn't that crazy to
generation.
consider? Gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. Well, Ellen, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I'm delighted that we got a chance to discuss Murder at the White Palace, which I think is brilliant. I love that both Gwen and Iris have cycled to a sort of a resting place, and then Alan's going to take it from there with his new publisher, Severed House.
Yeah.
So that being true, we'll be able to do this again. Right?
Absolutely. And I appreciate all the support you've given me over the years, going back to the first series as well. So it's a delight, and I hope to come out there, when it cools down maybe a little bit.
You don't want to come in July. We don't even want to be here in July. One of these days, we will organize another Historicon. Remember, Patrick, we've done one years ago when there were lots of authors, and I think I'm becoming increasingly attached to group events. I think having multi-author or more. By the way, Patrick, I heard today from Don Bentley that his friend, the Bourbon King, who lives here, is going to bring bourbon to our thriller event. On the condition, I said that the guy also pours, because we don't have a liquor license or insurance. So I want to make sure that nobody has more than one glass. But I think it's really fun to get groups together. So I'll work on a historical mystery.
Let me know.
Yeah, I will
get them
do that.
lubricated and freeing out their credit cards.
Right, that too.
Strategy.
Actually, I'll talk to Severn about it. They publish a lot of historical mysteries. So we've done group events for various publishers. So why not Severn?
Is there any chance of the Jester Leaps In and that series coming back into print?
We talked about
yeah, it's not my call. I wish. I'm still hoping, there's still a couple of them that aren't ebooks yet, which I would like to see. Yeah. Well, I think the two best ones in the series are not ebooks, which are from my perspective, but The Widow of Jerusalem and an Antic Disposition.
It's possible that Alan could get his rights back to the Fist books.
Were those Carroll and Graff?
No.
No, they were St. Martin's.
Minotaur. Yeah, I've been Minotaur for all of my mysteries until now.
Right.
Until the next one.
And you've had one of the best editors ever, my friend Keith Taylor. So
Keith is wonderful.
in that.
He knows where all the commas go.
Yep. He does, actually,
does.
and he started out as a bookseller, which, gladdens my heart is also because he understands how it works on this end as well as the publishing end.
He's
Anyway,
also got one of the great laughs too. When
he
if you
does.
really get him, it will just erupt from deep inside and
Yeah,
go on
we
for
usually
miles.
meet up at a mystery conference and,
Mhm.
have dinner together and kind of catch up on everything. He's wonderful.
Yeah.
So we do have autographed copies of Murder at the White Palace. I don't remember if we have autographed copies still of any of the earlier ones, but you can check with
I don't
us.
think so.
And we're happy to order the earlier books for you. If you've not read this marvelous British series, I really highly recommend it, especially if you're a fan of Jackie Winspear or even Dorothy Sayers. Yay.
Me.
Thanks. So thanks very much, Alan. Good night,
All right,
everybody.
thank you.